We are so back. I meant to say that at the first episode, but I forgot. We are so back. Buongiorno, everyone. Welcome, 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 everyone to day 4, giorno 4. Now I'm mixing languages. Day 4 of the Benvenuti a tutti alle Olimpiadi delle Vendite a Freddo. Io mi chiamo Rebecca. Nice to see everyone on day 4 of the Sales Cold Outreach Olympics. Look at all that snow in the background. So now we've got a couple of sports that have been under tow here. So now at this point, I've been through opening ceremonies with the incredible, absolutely mind-blowing, soul-wrecking, heart-wrecking Andrea Bocelli. If you have not seen that performance, I am going to mandate that as a must. You have to turn that off and go see Andrea Bocelli, his performance at the opening ceremonies. We went to men's downhill, which was incredible. It's kind of like that, but less turns, that slalom. And then also last night went to figure skating, which was quite a trip. I grew up watching figure skating. I don't know if it's just me. Y'all jump in the chat. Tell me who is in the chat, who's here today, who's made it to day 4, who's still alive. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like watching these winter sports is a little like Narnia, like watching Narnia. I grew up watching figure skating. Of course, I watched Michelle Kwan. Jump in the chat, say hello, give me your name, give me your favorite Olympic sport, and I want to know your favorite figure skater if you ever watch figure skating. Favorite figure skater or favorite Winter Olympian. So I don't know too much other than the figure skaters, but I loved Michelle Kwan, Tara Lipinski. I remember watching Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding during all of that drama. And then I actually had a fish named Brian Boitano because I loved watching Brian Boitano, and he was super sparkly, just like Brian Boitano used to dress. So anywho, we are going to get into the content for today. As much as I would love to talk about the Olympics, which trust me, I would. There's me. Just kidding. That's not me. It's just a joke. I get really fun. Y'all, I get fun. I don't know if I get funny, but I get fun during the Olympics. So we have a really spicy topic today. Really, and I know I say that about a lot of spicy topic or about a lot of the topics, but this one is a really big heavy hitter. So today we're going to do status quo versus indecision, when, why, and how 80% of deals are lost. And we are going to use the wonderful sport of curling as an example. So I have used curling in the past as an example. This wasn't a Winter Olympics theme, but it is specifically relevant in this use case, obviously, because there's so much curling going on. So we're going to be using curling as an example of how deals are won and lost. But this is a very, I would say, important topic and a very interesting topic because it goes into what is the psyche of a buyer? Like, why do you lose a deal? Because of the fear that's in a buyer's head. What are they thinking whenever you're selling to them? So we always see our side as the seller, as our journey, but what is happening in their brain? You know, what are the things that they're thinking? What are the things that they're afraid of? And then how can we truly be a guide, or some might call it a Sherpa, a guide, some cheeser people might call it a Sherpa, a guide through that process in a way that helps make them more able to be able to solve their problem. So it helps make them more confident that they're going to be able to solve their problem. So combat some of that fear. So most of the techniques that are used within selling itself, which we're going to go into a couple of the techniques that are used that will really kill you, especially like COI selling, for instance. But what are some of the techniques that people use? Why do those really damage your odds? And then what should you do instead to really, really combat that? Okay, let's go into pizza pie slice 1. Okay, so our first slice of the pie here is going to be what is status quo versus indecision. We kind of start with a definition perspective. So status quo is essentially when the problem is not big enough for a buyer to mobilize to solve. So you have pain and you have problem. So pain is a negative experience and problem is something that you solve or solve for. And the difference between those is not all pain are problem, meaning not all things that are negative am I actually going to solve for. And not all problems are painful yet. Sometimes I don't have any pain in the present and I'm solving to avoid pain in the future, right? So pain versus problem comes into play in terms of status quo because people are ranking what they're going to solve based on a number of different factors, but they're essentially making a priority list. What's important and what's important and urgent, what's urgent, not important, what's important but not urgent, and what's neither. And there's a lot of other factors that people include in there also that are not in that very simple graph. So, for instance, how many resources do they have internally to be able to deploy on this? What's the likelihood that they're going to be able to solve it? What's the likelihood that it's actually going to happen if they don't do anything and don't solve for it? Sorry, my nose is a little runny. See, I'm truly at the Winter Olympics. Truly at the Winter Olympics, y'all. I'm a little bit sick. So there's a number of different factors that are running through people's brains, but status quo is when the problem is not big enough, or the circumstance, the pain, the situation, and the impact is not big enough to warrant someone to actually mobilize to solve for it. So that status quo, that they are not willing to go through the pain of changing it. They would rather go through the pain of keeping it as is and running into the impact as they know it to be, based on what they know. Indecision is the problem is big enough. The circumstance is bad enough for them to do something about, but they still don't buy anyway. They started to make a decision. They started to evaluate vendors. They started to actually go about the process of solving it, but they still didn't buy anyway. So status quo, the problem's not big enough. Indecision, it is big enough. They started to solve it, but then they slowed down, and 80% of your deals are lost there. And there are a number of different techniques that people use essentially in this mix and this getup, but those are the two situations. So we're going to tie in the curling analogy early. So status quo, the problem's not big enough for the puck to start moving, meaning the puck hasn't even started the journey. So this is your buyer is still static. And you have to keep in mind, if your buyer is static, object in motion stays in motion, object at rest stays at rest, unless enacted upon by an outside force. So in the case that your buyer is status quo, so if you're going outbound, for instance, that is the status quo buyer based on what they know, even if they admit pain to you, even if they admit, some of the different things about what's going on in their day and, oh, that's a lot of pain. And then you go down that route and you're like, hey, can you double click? How much, self-diagnosis questions, how much, time has that been costing you, or how many benefit-centric selling, how much time and money has that been costing you? You have to keep in mind, whatever their problem is, even if it's around their metric, it's not big enough for them to solve yet, based on what they know. That is the key here. This is based on what they know. Indecision, it's a completely different use case, because this is the puck has started to move. So the puck is sliding down the ice, but then eventually it slows down and doesn't make it to the end. So this is the buyer started to solve for it. The buyer came inbound. The buyer started evaluating different vendors. So I think that people underestimate the almost urgency of people when they come inbound. You have to get, or the intentionality with people that come inbound. You have to keep in mind with inbound that people are doing more research than ever before, and they are evaluating and researching up to 20 different sources, peer-to-peer, industry influencers, reviews, looking online, comparison shopping, your competitors, X, Y, and Z. They've looked at 20 different sources of data before they came and actually requested to talk to a salesperson. The last thing out of the 24-store reports that buyers are going to look at is essentially talking to a salesperson. So when someone comes inbound, that means that they've truly mobilized in a meaningful way. If someone comes to just download some content or attend a webinar, they have mobilized to start thinking about solving the problem. At this point, I would guess that it is a pain, not a problem, meaning, like, let's take the use case of sales material, for instance. It's like, I have, someone's looking at objection handling webinar, or someone's watching discovery questions episode. They have started to evaluate the problem of, or how do I solve my current circumstances? How do I change my current circumstances? If not today, then in the future, if this thing did get bad enough, what would I do about it? But if someone was, let's say, 10x in quota, for instance, and there was no outlying impact on the line, I have a hard time believing, that they would spend exhaustive time thinking about, quote unquote, solving the problem. It's not about change. It's about what change is the most necessary based on what I know. So the element that most people play with in this, well, I don't think that people know the difference, number one. But even if they did, just because, I mean, again, I didn't even know the difference until I read Jolt Effect, until I read into that research, which is a wonderful book I would definitely recommend picking up. But I don't think that they realize the difference, number one. But even if they did, the how you treat those two use case scenarios, what people are afraid of in those two use case scenarios, even though they might sound similar, are extremely different. So the things that quote unquote would work, even though they statistically don't, but the things that would work better on a status quo lead are not going to work at all. They're going to have the counter effect on an indecisive lead. So essentially what's going through their head in all case scenarios, you have to keep in mind, all buyers have some sort of, all people within their job function have some sort of risk. They're afraid of risk aversion. So kind of well, I'll give you an example. When I went back to Paris, I was in the United States and I went back to Paris and I walked in the door, and this is the second time this had happened. My internet all of a sudden wasn't working. And so I immediately, and I didn't have a session that day or the next day, but I had one the following day. So I knew, I'm like, okay, Beck, this is certainly something I need to solve. But I mean, just that instance, for instance, if I had had a session the next day, I would have spent 6 hours that night staying up trying to figure out how to get it reconnected. But I didn't have one until the next day. So I spent the following day, going back and forth with vendors, calling people. How do I get this this internet working? I spent probably, I don't know, 5.5 hours trying to get someone, get the right person on the line. I had learned what Ethernet cables were. I have learned what a modem is. I've learned what a router is at this point, all in French, because I needed to get that internet hooked up. Were there a bunch of other things I needed to do that day? Yeah, probably. I had to unpack. I had to get back on the time zone. I had to do laundry, etc. But what was more important than any of that was getting my internet live. Why? Because there was an impact the next day if I couldn't get it live. Here's the point. After 5.5 hours or so, and I'd gone back and forth with the vendor, I'm like, you need to figure something out because whatever you're doing remotely is not working. It's not like, So I walked out the door because I had to go pick something up. And I knew hypothetically in the meantime, they might have changed it might have worked, meaning whatever they were doing remotely might have worked. When I came back in, my internet was working. Here's the funny thing, and here's the point. I had my box out in the middle of the floor because I was working on it and obviously evaluating it. When it was working, truly, I did not touch it. I'm like, internet's working. Let me make sure it's working. So I watched several different programs and loaded some devices. I left the internet box in the middle of the floor until I left to come to Milan. Why? Because I didn't want to change anything. Would moving the location from the box to my closet change something? Probably not. But I'm a buyer that's in fear. I'm a buyer that's in fear, right? So people are evaluating things in a priority list of what is the impact. And if you are going to a status quo deal, you have to keep in mind, if you're going to an outbound buyer, this is someone that they might have a little pain. My internet maybe is a little bit glitchy, but it's still functional, like hypothetically in that case. So I might spend a little bit of money to actually solve this, hypothetically if that were happening, but not a lot. An indecisive buyer is they have started to mobilize to do something about it. They've gone through all that pain. They've gone through all that decision-making process, but then they slowed down. So enough to where they stopped. So the question you have to ask in your head is why? What are the things that are making them stop? More importantly, what are the things that we can do to make them more confident through increasing their ability? One lap done. That's status quo versus indecision. So again, status quo is the problem, the circumstance, and the future circumstance, the current impact, the future impact, the business problem, the tactical problem, the root cause, all of that is not big enough based on what the buyer has in their day and based on what the buyer knows to actually do something about. Indecision is they do think that it's big enough. They started to mobilize to actually solve for it. but then they slowed down anyway. So those are the two use case scenarios we have on deck. Let's go into lap number 2. Lap number 2 is, what are they essentially afraid of? So what causes them to be in each one of those use cases? So let's start with look at all those acronyms. Explain to you what those acronyms are. So in both of these cases, your buyer has fear. They have what you would call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. In the first use case for status quo, they have a certain amount of fear of what will happen to them if they stay still. What's going to happen to me if I don't actually do anything about this? A certain amount of fear, but it hasn't grown to a point where it's enough to mobilize them. So you have to keep in mind, again, someone's going to stay in their state of mobilization unless something changes, unless enacted upon by an outside force. So if they're solving for it and nothing changes, then they're going to continue solving for it until they buy. If they aren't solving for it, unless something changes, they're going to stay in that state as well. And something can change, a litany of different factors can change. But in both case scenarios, it is all about fear. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt is what they have in their system. But the most important thing is what they're afraid of in both of these use cases is actually completely different. So for the status quo case, you have fear of inaction. What happens if I stay still? And based on what they know at this point, what happens if they stay still isn't enough to mobilize them. But you do have a certain amount of fear of inaction. It just hasn't grown to the point to where it's mobilized them, but it does exist. And this is why sellers usually ask about pain. Pain, because they're like, I don't get it. They admitted that they have pain. They admitted that this was going to spread to whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, but it's not big enough. It's not big enough in this use case scenario. So you have fear of inaction in status quo, but in indecision, you have fear of action. What happens if I start to do something about this and it doesn't work? What happens if I buy whatever it is, buy the product, and it doesn't actually help me solve my problem? If I had been at the Orange, the internet store, and there was some super expensive widget, I would have evaluated buying it. Why? The problem's big enough. But the thing that would have been going through my head, let's say I only had an hour until the session, is what happens if I buy this thing and it still doesn't work? I get home and it still doesn't work. So you have fear of inaction that's in status quo, which is what happens if I stay still, and it's at a certain point, but it's not at a point where it's going to change them to mobilize as is. And then you have fear of action with indecision. What happens if I move forward, if I try to solve for it, but I get it wrong? And in this case scenario, when they mobilized to buy, the fear of action was low enough to where they said, I'm confident, or it's not that bad, the circumstances that will happen to me if I get it wrong, or I'm confident that I'm not going to get it wrong. One of those two buckets is in the right place to where they started to move despite that fear. So regardless of the buyer state, they will have the one or the other of these fears. If I am a status quo buyer, I have a certain amount of fear of what happens if I stay still. But it's not at this point, given the circumstances and given what I know, enough for me to actually start moving to solve for it. In decision, I have a certain amount of fear of action. What happens if I try to solve for this and I get it wrong? Or what are all the circumstances that will happen to me if I get it wrong? Or what's the likelihood that I will get it wrong? And that exists, but it's not enough to have prevented them from mobilizing them to begin with, unless enacted upon by an outside force. So an outside force enacting upon a status quo deal is a good thing because the problem's not big enough. So if you find 3 problems they didn't know, all of a sudden they're going to mobilize. So you're trying to change the state of their static in this case scenario. So change is a good thing for this type of lead. In an indecisive lead, you're trying to prevent them from slowing down. So them changing from a state of being mobilized to decelerating is a bad thing from the seller's perspective. Meaning, if enough of these happen, if enough of these fears come up, it will slow them down to a complete halt, just like in curling. Enough of these pieces of ice, come up, it will slow down the puck entirely before they reach the quote unquote finish line. So you have those two fears going on, and then you have a certain amount of fears of errors. So you have error of commission and you have error of omission. Error of omission is in the this is my status quo side today. TV is the indecision side. You have errors of omission and errors of commission. Errors of omission are what happens, what are the things that are going to happen to me if I omit an action. So if I don't do anything about it, what is going to happen to me? And what they are hypothetically scared of to some level, but not enough, is that them omitting an action, that them not actually doing something about it, is going to be fatal. What happens if I stay still and it's fatal that I stayed still? On the other side, you have errors of commission. What happens if I start to make an action, start to actually do something about this, and it doesn't work? So out of both of these sides, you have to keep in mind the one that is much stronger, the one where you are going to lose way more deals, is not status quo. And that's where everyone spends their time selling to. Not that the techniques are necessarily, statistically, they're not proven that they're effective. But the where you're going to lose your deals are just, the stats are clear. 60 to 80% of the deals are going to be lost to indecision, meaning they started to try to solve for it, but they slowed down. There's enough things that came in the deal that slowed them down. Things like procurement, things like legal, things like internal movement. Their decision makers swapped out. Yeah, I think that's France. A leader changed. Things changed around in the midst of it. Things changed around for them internally, and it slowed down their mobility. So their fear is in a certain state. But let's say that three decision makers, three people from the executive board, all of a sudden are aware that this purchase is happening. All of a sudden, I'm a little bit more nervous of what happens if I get this wrong, because there's more eyes on it. So that's a change that happened. Now, is it a change enough to slow them down entirely? Who knows? Meaning, the more of these things that happen, and let's say that all of a sudden procurement gets involved, and procurement is putting the heat on. They're like, you can only make 2 purchases this year. Are you sure that you want to make this one as a purchase? That's a change that they didn't have before. So is that enough to actually slow them down? And both of these use case scenarios, you have to also keep in mind the fear that your buyer has is completely valid, meaning it's valid to be afraid. Sometimes they're not afraid enough. They're not afraid enough of what's about to happen. Sometimes they're too afraid. But in either case scenario, you have to keep in mind, they're not trying to play bad guy. They're not trying to intentionally screw up a deal. When they started to solve for it, they were in all good reaction. They were. That's why the statistics, I believe, around inbound motions are so drastic. It's if you don't get to back to someone within 5 minutes, you see a drastic drop off in conversion of people who will book a meeting and people who will actually buy and solve for it. So in terms of timing, same day is the best case scenario. You see about a 15% reduction when you go to the first day, 1 day later, 15% about when you go to day 2. Past 5 days, you basically kiss the deal goodbye. Why? Because I don't think it's because they're pissed. I don't think it's because the timing's off. I think it's because it makes them more afraid when you don't get back to them that they're not going to be able to solve it. Meaning a certain amount of them being able to solve it is going to be vendor reliability. So if I'm not even hearing back from the person that could bail me out and make me less afraid and make me more confident through the actions of showing me that this is actually going to work, then my fear is going to grow, right? So that's why you'll see buyers request a demo and then ghost. And 70% of buyers will go with the partner who gets back to them first. No other criteria. That is the correlation. That's how strong it is. Now, is it causation? Statistically speaking, we don't know. but 70% will go with the vendor who got back to them first. Why? I think it's because, yes, it's a communication of what they're going to be able like to work with, but more importantly, it makes them more confident that if they're this readily responding, I believe they'll do that in the future if I have an issue. So if I do run into an issue and I'm not actually solving my problem, I believe that when I reach out to them, they're going to get back to me fast and they're going to help me solve my problem so that I can get my issue addressed and solve for the master problem successfully. 3 seconds to spare. Apparently, when I was at Downhill, I heard of the announcement. By the way, Italians are very, very rowdy about their skier support. That's all I'm going to say. They are very, very rowdy. But when I was listening at Downhill and watching it, by the way, they look like a bullet. They look like an actual bullet. I had to focus when someone was coming over the hill, because I was basically at a point where you could see them coming down the hill and then they would jump over. They would make a jump. I had to intentionally focus to catch them coming over that hill. And there was probably, I don't know, like a 100-meter spread or something of how long I had to see them coming over the hill. They were going so fast that I had to really be looking just to catch them. And I'm not talking about taking a picture. I'm talking about actually filming, because they were going 90 miles an hour over that hill. On a side note, I know that I don't make a lot of jokes. I'm not very much fun. However, and I'm not going to show anyone this picture, but I just think it's worth mentioning that I did it. I was like, I want to take a picture. I want to take a selfie with one of the downhill skiers. And I was like, I know what I can do. So I basically turned the camera around and waited when someone was coming down the hill. And then I just took 1,000 screenshots of smiling, so that when they came flying over the hill, there's a couple of pictures where for a millisecond, they were in the background flying by. And I'm like this. So I'm not going to show you the picture, but I thought it was worth mentioning that maybe I should seek medical attention and help. Okay, let's go into lap 3. No more of that. So status quo, problem's not big enough. Indecision, problem is big enough that they slow down. Status quo, fears of action. You have fear of inaction, and you have errors of omission that they're worried about, but they're not strong enough to get them to move forward. Indecision, you have fear of you have fear of action. What happens if I do this and I'm not successful? You have errors of commission. What happens? What are all the errors that will come up if I start to make an action about this problem, and will they actually be solved? You have to keep in mind, they have a fear of the errors that will happen when they're trying to deploy it, and that it might cause new problems. And you also have the fear that they won't solve their original problem. You have both of those in an action deal. So keep in mind, action is risky. Taking action is risky because it changes what's going on right now and it might make it worse. So the third thing I wanted to go into is what the buyer is also in, essentially in an indecision deal. We know that they have fear of action, but what are they in a detailed manner really afraid of? So they're statistically afraid of 3 things in an indecision deal, which is, again, 80% where you're going to lose your deal. They're afraid of that they're going to pick the wrong product. They're afraid of that there's too much information out there for them to disseminate through. And they're afraid of the biggest heavyweight is outcome uncertainty. Yes, I'm afraid of that I picked the wrong product. Yes, I'm afraid that I don't know enough to be able to pick the right product. But the main thing that they're afraid of is, if I try and take this action, will it actually work? Will it actually work? Will it make my situation worse? I mean, heaven forbid it makes it worse or keeps it the same. But in the end, will it actually work? And with outcome uncertainty, in enters what's called omission bias. So omission bias is a psychological preference for a buyer or for anyone to stay still than to make a decision, and is essentially the fear that it's not going to actually work out their decision. And this fear, statistically speaking, is about 2 to 3x stronger than the preference for mobilizing. So people's preference is to stay still. Why? Because they know what happens so far when they stay still. If I go to make a change, just like you have to keep in mind, just like with the internet with me, I knew moving the box 5 inches was not going to do anything. I knew that objectively. But emotionally, as a buyer, I did not know that. I was like, you never know what could happen. And I had spent 5.5 hours on the phone, but it wasn't about the sunk time. The thing I was most worried about is what happens if I move this and then all of a sudden my internet doesn't work again. And then I can't do the session tomorrow. Then I've got a very big problem. So I objectively knew, but you have to keep in mind for 3 weeks, I vacuumed around an internet box and I'm like, don't touch the box. Why? Because of fear. Fear is not a logical creature. It can be fought sometimes, regardless of what people say. It can be, you can use data to absolve some of it. And we're going to go on how to do that. But it is not a logical creature, right? That was not logical Beck in that room saying, clearly, if I move this thing 5 feet, then it's not going to change it. But that's where the buyer's at, is they're afraid of outcome uncertainty. They're afraid something's going to go wrong in there, because you have to keep in mind, it could be it's the wrong product. It could be I open it incorrectly and I break it. It could be, I don't know how to set it up. It could be there's some kind of internet issue. There could be, 1,000 different things. Or I actually start to use a product. It is working. All of that stuff is absolved. And I still can't it was the wrong tool to begin with. Or I don't know how to use it effectively. I tell you what, this Winter Olympics has been humbling, to say the least. Humbling because I obviously don't compete in winter sports. I never have. This is the first time, or a couple days ago was the first time ever seeing a winter sport. I don't know anything about really anything, except for I watched the stuff growing up as a kid. I always wanted to come see it, but I don't know the logistical ins and outs of downhill skiing and like what the footing is called, for instance. So much so to the point where when I went to downhill, I didn't know that to get to my tickets, like the tickets are like up, I'm trying to, this way, like up right there. So you have to hike up a mountain, essentially. And I had to hike up a mountain, which for normal people who had brought the proper gear, it was hard enough. They had boots on and they're trekking up this mountain. I had track shoes on, like lime green Pumas track shoes with no traction on the bottom. Okay. And I have on like warm, but yoga pants. So I bet they were like, what is she doing? And I'm having to trek up a mountain in snow that's making, like everyone was falling down around because it was so slippery getting up this. I mean, it's a downhill slope. There was no ski lifts. And I'm trying to get up this thing in Puma track shoes. As a point of my credibility, I did not fall that entire mountain. I sought out a strategy. I'm like, I'm just going to put my feet in the Bigfoot's prints that's going up, before me. But the point is, why did I wear those shoes? I didn't know. I didn't know I was going to have to hike up a mountain. I didn't know that I was going to be walking through snow. Somehow, I didn't know that. I thought, I don't know, there's a rock path that I would be walking through to get the tickets. I didn't know that my tickets were, right at that jump. I didn't know that they were in the woods and the forest where Bigfoot lives. I didn't know all of those elements. I didn't know that they wouldn't have a guardrail. And so I just assumed, but I ran into that. And you have to keep in mind, your buyer is used to, just like you are, running into things that prevent the thing that they want from happening. That's just life. We try to solve for something, it doesn't work. We try to hit quote, it doesn't, that guy. It happens like that guy or girl, sorry. That just happened for her. Like, life doesn't work out. You miss a turn, something happens, and they are deathly afraid of that in solving for anything. Anytime that someone solves for something, they spend money, they put their credibility on the line. If this thing doesn't work, they don't just lose the cash. They lose timing, sometimes makes the problem worse. They lose internal credibility. All of a sudden their team doesn't back them up. Like, if you didn't know if you are sure that this first action was going to work, and it doesn't work, why would I trust you a second time when if you're even more sure, you're like, no, but this time it's actually going to happen. This time it's actually going to work out. I'm like, how do you know? I want to trust you, but the data tells me that I shouldn't. And you have all of those elements coming in and fighting to keep the buyer still, to demobilize them. Why? Because it's actually solving for something successfully. Like, Currently, you're not rolling the dice. If I start to take an action, that's when the timer starts of I'm at risk that this thing won't work and that my name will be all over it. Errors of omission, hypothetically, a buyer can say weren't my fault. I came into a organization, let's say, and the team wasn't hitting quota or whatever it is. You didn't to date have anything to do with that. But errors of commission, when you start to make an action, let's say that you, I don't know, put in a software, or you hired a trainer, or you hired a couple people, or you hired a sales enablement leader, and it still doesn't work, now the issue is on you. You are a part of the issue. That's why it's a commission error. This one was outside of my action, and it's certainly outside of my accountability. Error of commission is not outside of my accountability. I had something to do with this. Plus, when I make that decision, sometimes it makes the action worse. So the old problem was this. The new problem is the thing that I just did. So any kind of movement in this deal, you have to keep in mind, buyers are very unstable because they haven't gone through this. And instead of, and then we're going to transition the next slide to what we can do about it. Instead of trying to help them be able to solve their problem more effectively, the kryptonite is we focus on in sales, how do I make them believe that they'll be successful? Or how do I make them believe that I'm the best product? Or how do I make them believe that my competitor is not the one to go with? How do I make them it gets sick, believe that they should buy? How do I get them to calculate out the cost of an action so they believe that they should move forward? So I can try and grow that fear. There's a lot of different problems with what's going to happen now, which we're going to go into. But the main problem is your focus is on how do you get someone to believe something when you don't know if it's objectively true. It's not on how can I help the buyer. It's on how can I help myself first. So that's lap 3. So we have status quo, indecision. Status quo, you have fears of inaction, errors of omission. Is status quo, and they are at a certain level, and they're not big enough to actually mobilize to do something. Indecision, you have fear of action. What happens if I move and I get this wrong? You have errors of commission, and you have, statistically speaking, they're afraid of 3 things. They're picking the wrong product. They're picking there's too much information to disseminate between. And but the main heavyweight is outcome uncertainty. What happens if I do all of this and none of this works? None of this actually helps me solve my problem, and I still fail anyway and make the situation worse. But certainly for myself, by default, if I make an action, it makes the situation worse. I have less capital, less credibility, less internal steam to do it. So now I have a mark on my record. So that's indecision. Okay. That was lap 3. Let's go into lap 4. I will say, in terms of, actually, it's going to be an even more grim lap, and then we're going to go into what you can do about it. When I was at Downhill, sorry, y'all, I'm just going to say it. I'm Team France. I was really excited when France came out. Sorry. I still support the U.S., but I was really excited when France came out. And they have a really big skiing community. Here's a fun fact. There are more ski resorts in France than there are in anywhere in the world. So there's more, essentially set up there. But so I just got really warm whenever the French team came out, and they had a lot of skiers, and they also, they had a lot of skiers. So when I went to Downhill, they're like, okay, blank set from Team France, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like going wild. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be so much fun. So I'm cheering. It was the first video that I got on footage. And here comes France coming down the hill, and I'm like, Allez! And I can hear all the French people in the background shouting out Allez, which means like go, keep going. And they come over the hill, they come rocketing over the hill, and then right in front of me, spill. It was the only skier that spilled. It was Team France. We were all heartbroken on this side. I got it on camera too. It's the only one I got on camera. Anywho, okay. Speaking of danger, the 3 most dangerous techniques that sellers use. So sellers try to do a lot of very interesting stuff in any of these situations. the main thing that's wrong, in my opinion, is the intent. The intent is, how do I do something to my buyer? It's not on how to help my buyer. If we just change that, we would be honestly completely fine. But that thing's not going to change. It's just, I know emotionally speaking, it's not going to change. Of like, when you see all of these different techniques, pain-centric selling, how do I get their current state and future state so I can justify and I can hold my guts in pricing? I'm like, it's still about you. How do I challenge what they're thinking? I'm like, it's still about you. How do I get them to agree on a problem to solve? I'm like, still about you. I'm like, why? So that they buy? Because it's easier for you. Is it better for them to agree on the problem? Because it's not. They have different problems. How is that helpful for them that they agree on the problem to solve when they all have different problems? Because they all have different buyer personas. Each one of these are just a step. How do I get them to talk so that because it's better for me. It's better for me as a seller because then they feel better. How do I get them to feel heard or feel understood or how do I get dopamine firing off in their brain because then they like me? How do I focus on relationships? I'm like, it is all about you. You're focused on that relationship so that they will buy. That is the culprit. That culprit is deep and it's got thousands of years of sales history in it, but it is a very simple one to change. So instead of the agenda being on how do I get them to buy, it's change it to how can I help them to solve, regardless of whether they use me or not. There are some case scenarios where hypothetically what they're trying to solve with you is not the right thing to do first for them. If you take up them as the number one, from me to you, a guarantee, your numbers will increase, period. They just will. Because all of a sudden they're your teammate and they'll give you more information, which is all very helpful. They'll trust you more, but you'll be able to help them more. Why? You're thinking about them. I don't believe that necessarily sellers don't know a ton. It's that they're not even thinking about how could I use information or learn more information so that I could help this person actually solve the problem. So whether they knew or didn't know this thing about, whatever it was is irrelevant. It's that they weren't focused on it. So there's three main culprits that people try to use in the case scenario of indecision. There's ROI selling. I see this in all kinds of selling. ROI selling is this. ROI selling and benefit-centric selling are the exact same thing. And here's the litmus test on that you're doing it. You are focused on saving time and saving money. More time, more money. Wasted time, wasted money. Lack of efficiency. I had someone tell me the other day, they're like, yeah, and the buyers say 15 hours a week. I'm like, that doesn't matter. Did they hit their number? Like, what do you mean? I'm like, what kind of buyer is it? They're like, IT buyer. I'm like, do they hit their server uptime? If I save 10 hours a week, but then I still don't hit my server uptime as an IT director, it does not matter. Let's put it like this. Let's say that you get your haircut. Well, a lot of people get their haircut. I'm not going to assume anything. And, your haircut it takes an hour. For me, it takes an hour. And let's say it costs $150, okay, to get your haircut. I could save you a heck of a lot of time and a heck of a lot of money. What if I came up and said, I can save you a ton of time and it'll only cost you $10. You'll save $140. It will take 5 minutes. And you, like, in your ROI head, you're like, that's a great deal. I'm like, great, awesome. You give me the $10. I take a buzzer and I just buzz off your head when you have hair the length of mine. Save you time, save you money. But not only did I not solve your problem, I created a new one. That is what selling is about. And when you're thinking about ROI selling, I see everyone, a use case after use case after use case, use case of people putting together ROI calculators of how many people are going to save time and save money. Even if you put that together, it's usually not accurate, and they know that. Even if you put it together and it's accurate, they know it's not a guarantee. So it's, from an exercise perspective. But when I see rep after rep after rep after rep put together an ROI sheet, or talk about save time or save money, and they put all this internal resources and all of their executives around the hood, and they're like, okay, how much ROI this is in the use case to buy for this? How much ROI are they going to save? When I see that, I don't see anything but a fundamental misunderstanding of why buyers buy. They do not buy to save time and money. My internet problem was not about time and money. I would have given you $300. I don't know. I would have gotten desperate enough where I would have given you 1,000 to get my internet working. It was not about time and money. It was about solving my problem. So the first selling type that people use is ROI selling. So if you're saying save time, save money, wasted time, wasted money, lack of revenue, leaving revenue on the table is a big one. Inefficiency, if like the ineffective process, I'm like, that's just a fancy way to say wasted time. The second one was discounts. These are going to plummet your results. But the third one is COI selling. My stomach gets sick when I even say it, which is cost of inaction selling. What this is you're trying to get your buyer to calculate out based on their self-diagnosis information what the cost of not moving forward is. It's usually written with self-diagnosis questions. What's the impact to you? What are the ripple effects? How much time is that costing you? Blah, blah, blah. Now we're doubling in two selling styles. But it's trying to get the buyer to calculate out with their words in front of you, the exercise of what's going to happen to them. What are the dragons will happen to them if they don't move forward? It sounds like it's close to the right thing, but there's two problems to it. Number one is, generally speaking, I'm going to say 100% of the time people are using self-diagnosis information. What the buyer believes, a doctor is not after what the patient believes. They are at the beginning just to understand, is it correct or not? Meaning, I want to know what you believe and why you believe it. But then I'm going to ask a certain amount of questions to understand what's fundamentally true. That is the difference between a seller and someone who's in the room that I want to leave and I just want to give me pricing. That is the difference. Is, am I asking questions to find things that are not objectively true, things that they believe that aren't true, that are wrong, and things that they've missed. COI selling, you're just trying to get them to say out loud why, and it's sick because it's good for you as a seller if they say that stuff, because then they believe that they should buy. This is psychology. When people talk about pain, it increases their desire to solve it. And we're focused on that. How do I psychologically manipulate them into believing that they should buy before? You can only have one focus at the beginning. When you take a picture, you can put this in focus and not me, or me in focus and not that. It is digital. And my question is, what is our focus? Is our focus trying to manipulate them, trying to get them to say this thing out loud, or pain sell and trying to say all the pain out loud so that they buy? Or is it to diagnose how they can best solve their problem, what they've missed, what they need, what they don't need? What are the things that they believe that aren't true based on my expertise because I've put in the time, versus how do I manipulate? So if my mindset at all as a litmus test is on what are they thinking, how do I get them to believe, get them to say, persuade them to, influence them to, how do I get this other decision maker in the deal? You're in the wrong. You're in the wrong. We've got to stop. And the good news is, or it's bad news, depending on how you see it. If you COI sell, you will 87% of the time drastically decrease the odds that you're going to close. So what's good for them is good for you, bad for them, bad for you. Fairly in time. So those are the three techniques that sellers mostly use. Offer discounts. They offer discounts. They ROI sell. This is all the time you're going to save and money. You're going to say blah, blah, blah. Or they COI sell. Another key attribute of this, or something that people do, is they or a good litmus test of this is they're sending emails to their buyer to remind their buyer of the pain. I'm confused. You said that if you don't move forward by June, blah, blah, which from a psych view, to get ahead of it, this is like not even Psych 101. It's like Psych 001. The reason I'm being so offensive here, I'm putting us as trainers in the fire here. The reason I'm being so heavy on this, it's ridiculous. We have just got to focus on our buyer. We have just got to focus on what's right for them. But it's like Psych 001 of, if I like the whole, trying to get them, you said that if you didn't move forward by this date, it's kind of like a kid being like, you said that we could go to the Winter Olympics. And it's like, well, I have to come up with a reason, but the punchline is still going to be, I made a decision as an adult that we're not going to do this. And now I just have to have the conversation. So from a psych perspective, it's going to hurt you. But when you're coming back in, the only thing that you're increasing is their knowledge that your intent is to manipulate them and that your intent is to sell. Your intent is not to solve. If your intent was to solve, the emails you would be sending are around helping them to solve it, regardless of whether it's working with you or not. And you wouldn't so much be worried about, the other. If your intent is to sell, that's all the emails are going to be. Just following up, just circling back. Any updates? Here's a good litmus test. The any updates email. If we're trying to help them solve, what do we need an update on? Are we asking them an update on they solved it? And any updates on how effectively you did this? I cannot tell you a time where I've seen a seller send an update, any updates email after the purchase was made, which is when hypothetically you would be asking or sending that email if you were interested in helping them solve it. They just bought it and you're like, any updates? Did it actually work? Did your team use it okay? Any updates on did it work with the team? Instead, we have a customer success rep sending it a Thanksgiving turkey in November. Why? Because they have to warm up the deal so that they don't churn. Right? Buyers are afraid that we're going to leave them, which is the truth. And they're also afraid that we don't know enough, which is the truth. And so they're having to educate themselves because they know when you're gone, they're going to have to do it. So all of these techniques, when you're trying to put their nose in it and you're like, I'm confused. You said that if you don't move forward by June 1st, I'm like, first of all, you're in the wrong because you're saying you said. A doctor's not like you said. They're like, I know based on what I asked. The second thing is, what is the point of that other than I'm going from a site, I'm trying to put your nose in this to try to get you to move forward. Why? Because I want to sell. Here's the great thing. We're going to the next lap. I mean this. The one who doesn't want the ring is the one who's responsible at the ring, who it qualifies to hold the ring. The seller who's focused on just helping the buyer is the one whose their numbers will be at the top. I am seeing time and time and time and time again. I'm guaranteeing you, if that is your North Star, helping them, all of your actions are going to follow your agenda. If your agenda is to help them, all of your actions are going to follow that. Here's some material I thought you might use. Here's an article I thought you might like. Oh, by the way, even if they do buy, which you're going to be just as hesitant as they are because you don't know if it's the right thing. I prevent buyers from buying me sometimes. I really do. Because I'm like, I'm not going to put my that's blood on my hands. I'm not going to let you buy me as a trainer if it's not going to work. I have prevented sales before. I'm like, no, I refuse to sell you. I'm sorry. I know and it's been a really sweet conversation, but I'm like, I know. I mean, I used a case where a guy was like, he was like, we need you to increase your meetings, go through the whole discovery, blah, blah, blah. He's booking 25 meetings on outbound a month with a pretty high ACV. And I'm like, bro, average is like 3 per month. And like, when I go into the statistics of it, he's like, it's because our AEs are missing quota by 60%. I'm like, got it. What's the conversion? He's like 4. I'm like, yeah, there's no amount of pipeline you can send over to get them to hit the quota. What needs to happen is their increased conversion. He's like, I don't run that department. I'm like, well, then that's another problem. But there's no sale with me because if I take you from whatever, 30 to 40 or 40 to 45, that's not going to solve your problem. And then all it's going to do is give the VP a reason to fire you. Right? Because now you spent money and his problem is not solved. Yes, it's because he's misidentifying the issue, but I don't care. The math is the same. He's going to look at you as a reason. So I'm not going to sell to you. We're still friends to this day. He's passed me 3 deals. I didn't ask him to, because I'm like, if that is your intent, they will back you up. Your numbers will be there. Okay, let's go to the next lap. Enough drama back. What to do on disco calls instead. We actually might end up combining this lap. We'll see. Okay, so what to do on disco calls instead. I went into that the other day. Discovery is very simple. Even getting better at it is very simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. You have to change your outcome to my goal when I win is when I find something that they didn't know. My intent is to be a doctor on that call. Find out who they are, all the details of that. I would pretend like you are paid to solve the problem. And so all the questions follow suit. So you win, you change the outcome to. My win is when I find something that they didn't know to help them. So there are 2 categories of that. Misdiagnosis and misdiagnosis. People, Kirsten is and Jay Frank, they're probably gonna be like, you're gonna get a misdiagnosis tattoo. I mean, maybe I should get a Kirsten and Jay Frank tattoo. So, a misdiagnosis is something you believe that's not true. Misdiagnosis is something you miss entirely. Both of these are massive categories. What I believed that wasn't true was that I was going to be that my seat was at the bottom of the hill. It wasn't. There was one problem. I also didn't realize, here's a misdiagnosis, that I was going to have to go through snow, which is ridiculous. At the Winter Olympics, I didn't realize that. So Beck is in all of her glory marching up. I mean, it takes like 25 minutes to get up the hill, and everyone is slipping. And I'm doing it in Puma track shoes with zero tread, which are ruined. My babies are ruined because why? Did I want to ruin my precious pair of shoes? No. It's one of my favorite pair. They're gone. They're gone. Why? I didn't know. It's not. I would hope it's not because I'm stupid. I mean, I don't think I'm stupid, but the test results show I'm not, it's that I didn't know. Why? It's not my expertise. The Winter Olympics should show you nothing other than it is not my expertise. So I make mistakes. Why? Because I just don't know. I don't know what happens of like, I'm from Texas. I've lived in LA, San Francisco, and Paris. None of those snow. Paris does like once a year, maybe. Like I had to physically buy an actual coat to be a real human being to come here. That doesn't make me dumb. So when I'm trying to solve a problem in relationship to Winter Olympics, like I need help, just like buyers need help. So if you were to come to me and say, what kind of shoes do you need? Like, I literally don't even know what they're doing right now. I didn't know what were those guns, bows and arrows? Who has skis on guns? Or sorry, who has guns on skis? Is that a gun? I don't even know what that is going on right now, right? It's not because I'm dumb. It's because it's not my area of expertise. You need to allow your buyers the luxury of it's not their expertise, and to a certain level, it stays not their expertise. Why? Because it was yours. So if someone were to walk up to me and say, what kind of equipment do you need to buy to go skiing? I'd be like, please leave. And if I had to solve an issue around that, I would have to research and research and research, just like our buyers are having to do. Why? Because they're not confident that a seller would. Someone's going to try and sell me skis and they're like, what do you need? If you were to anchor to what I say I need, you'd be out of your mind. What do you need? I'm like, and you're like, what kind of skis? I'm like, are there different brands? You mean what color? I don't know. Do I need different boots? Like I genuinely felt like with in the movie Step Brothers, when he's going through with his therapist of what it means to be an adult, he's like, I don't know. What do you wear? What do you say? What if there's inclement weather? Like, I feel like that with all of this. If you were to say, what do you need to go skiing? Like, I know there's something about a double black diamond. I don't know any of the other levels. I have literally been skiing twice. Once was when I was 7, and apparently I went off path, and in my head it was to a double black diamond accidentally, but apparently it was just the next level. And I saw it. My family still makes fun of me to this day. At the age of like 7 or 8, which are supposed to be super like risky and flying down the hill, blah, 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 my brother was, I literally saw the depth of the hill, snapped off my skis, sat down in the snow, and boot scoot boogied down the entire hill from fear. It took me like an hour and a half to get down the hill. That is my level of skiing expertise. And if you were to ask me, Beck, what kind of skis do you need? You could ask anyone else and they would have more information. But that's what we're doing. Or we're shoving them to have to do the research themselves. So in discovery, every single time that you found something that I didn't know, which would not be hard to do, you do 3 things. Number 1, you help me know that your agenda is to help me, period. The second thing that you help me do is you help me understand that you help increase my confidence that I can actually do this, because there's some Italian in the background. Hey, you help increase my confidence that I'm going to actually be able to do this because you found one more thing that I was going to get wrong that now I'm not because of you. And the third thing that you do, the third thing you do is you increase my ability. And the fourth that you do is you increase my trust and confidence in your ability as a seller. That I'm like, would I be confident to go skiing or buy? No, I wouldn't. But if there is very clear, if an expert was in the room, would I feel confident with them? Yes, of course I would. Why? They're an expert. But the number one way that you could show me you're not an expert is by asking me what I need or what I want or what I think or what's the impact to you or what are the ripple effects based on my opinion, and then anchoring there, which is what we do. We're like, what are the ripple effects to you, blah, blah, blah. That you're asking me what I think, which shows me nothing else then. I'm like, okay, so it's up to my opinion. So we're based on my skiing knowledge. And then I'm pissed. So I'm like, move. Because I'm pissed that I have to do all the research because you didn't. And then you're trying to send me follow-up emails. So we have an opportunity there. The thing to do in discovery is to subsume the idea that your goal, your North Star is to solve it. But who you're going to have to use is the person standing in front of you, who's the buyer. So there's two things that could go wrong in that equation. Number one, that it's not solvable. But number two, that the person in front of me is under the misunderstanding of what they should do in order to be successful. So how I need to solve for that is understand, what do they believe and why do they believe it? What is their self-diagnosis? They think that they should go to the left, or, I mean, here's another example. They have a category B ticket that's at entrance A, and the category A ticket that's at entrance B. Super confusing, right, Italy? So I went through all the check-in for the wrong category, and they're like, no, it says A. And I'm like, no, but it says B right here. And they're like, that's the category. I'm like, unbelievable. I'm like, couldn't you do it? So I had to walk 30 minutes. I was almost late. I almost missed it. Why? I didn't know. So it's, what do they believe and why do they believe it? Then it's, what do I believe? What's the true fundamental diagnosis? And then what's the difference? What's the difference between those two? So I do have to know what they believe and why they believe it. They do have to know that I believe that I'm not going to have to walk through snow because I see the sands in the background. It looks like there's pavement around. They do need to know that I believe that. But the reason they need to know that is so that when they realize, two questions deep, they're like, yeah, she's walking through snow, that they know how to blow it up. If they didn't know that I believe that, then they wouldn't target it. Why? Because every normal human being would realize that you're going to have to walk through some snow to go to the mountain. So the thing to do in discovery instead that will counteract all of this, and we're going to get into the curling example, and we're going to close out. The thing to do is to approach discovery and find, every single time you find a misdiagnosis or a misdiagnosis, something you believe that's not true or something they've missed entirely, you win. Why? Because they win. If they had prevented me from that shoes, they would have saved me $100 and my precious shoes would still be here. And now I'm down a pair of shoes, right? So it causes a bigger problem. Now I got to go get another pair of shoes because what am I going to wear? Because I didn't know. You change that to your goal, you win, they win. They win, you win. The more you find, the better off they are, the better off you are. You do that, and all the indecision, and you grow the problem, which helps the status quo, but you counter the ice and the friction and indecisive deal because they're more confident. They're going to be able to get it right, and they're not going to run into all the circumstances of what happens if they get it wrong, because they won't. I'm staying on time today in Min's face, and everyone's not in y'all's face, in Min's face, though, a little bit. Come on, let's be real. Min gets a little haughty when I go over. So I am staying on time for this one. Okay, so we're going to go into the example of curling. I actually probably won't even need the whole 600 seconds, but I want to go into the analogy just to iron this out, and then we're going to close out. So why and how deals are lost. So you have to keep in mind, it is very, very important what's going through a buyer's mind. Very important. Not only so you can help them, not so you can counter it, so you can help them, but also to know what actions fundamentally, that won't help you, won't help them. So here's the analogy, which I use this as a curling analogy before the Winter Olympics to everyone who's making fun of me for the number of puns. So you have a puck in curling, they shove it down the ice, and you have people in front of it that are just putting these little brooms and they're trying to remove friction of the ice, the perfect amount to where it slows down in the perfect spot. So essentially think of it like a dart and a bullseye, but with a puck and ice and brooms, right? People are like, we know what curling is. You don't know what curling is. So here's the important thing. Here's the very important thing that I'm going to put us again in the fire that I think 99.9999999% of trainers have gotten wrong fundamentally. The important thing is it's not preventing them from slowing down. It's not being worried about preventing them from slowing down or helping them speed up. It's enough to where you get a goal. So like in curling, it's not that they're trying to remove all the ice, or sometimes it's too much. What if they remove too much and it goes past the bullseye? It's the perfect amount of where it needs to go. Keep in mind, I'm saying this with the lights because my stomach still hurts. The goal in this case scenario is how do I get them to slow down, like meaning to where they cross the line. But let's take that in the box that that's the goal. The goal is to get them to close, which is an offshoot of what happens whenever you do correct selling. Not the goal, but I digress. So status quo is you essentially, the puck hasn't even started moving based on what they know, based on the impact that they know, the future impact that they know, the business problem, the tactical problem, the root cause that they know. It's not big enough to actually mobilize. But when they are mobilized, this is specifically to outline the case of indecision. Indecision is the puck's moving, and all of an object of motion is going to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. Procurement comes up, and that's some ice. Legal comes in, and that's some ice. Two more decision makers come in, and that's some ice. You have a leadership change, and that's some ice. You have a budget cut, and that's some ice. And all of these things, it depends on how aggressive it is. But it's not about just slow it down. Again, if enough of these things build up, puck will slow down entirely. It'll stop. So it's countering the mobility of the buyer. So there are three variables that can affect. So what you're like, not what you're trying to do, but what happens when you're selling effectively is that when procurement does pop up, and that's a piece of ice. But when you find an unknown, it's like you're the guy with the broom that you just got rid of that ice. You countered that ice. Why? Because it increases their confidence that they're going to be able to solve for it effectively. All of that's going to matter if I can't solve for it effectively. So you are increasing their ability. So it increases their confidence that they won't get it wrong, like overall. So it's not that necessarily the circumstances lessen. You can affect, I don't care what anyone says, you can. If anyone is telling you, like, here's how to sell to procurement, number one, that's the wrong way to sell to them. You have to focus on procurement's KPIs, which one of them is how often and how aggressive they get you to discount. On a side note, you want to help them? Or go to the CFO. Here's the one sheet of the CFO of what the ROI is, which we're already off base, to the sales department. So like basically you're going to the CFO and you're like, come on, please. It's not going to work. You have to focus on CFO's KPIs. But you cannot effectively change it. They know what you're doing and you have no access to them in a lot of case scenarios. And you don't know. Your buyer's not going to call you every 2 seconds to be like, hey, procurement just called me, and all these things come up and you don't know. You don't know when the ice is going to come up. You don't know you don't even know how to avoid it. But what does effectively avoid it is every time you find an unknown for the buyer, it makes them less afraid of getting it wrong. And it also makes them more confident that if it was not solvable, you're so much of an expert and you have their agenda in your head so much that you would tell them, right? So every single time that you counter, or how to counter those is not by equipping them to go to procurement. I'm like, yeah, y'all, procurement sees it coming from a mile away. I'm being nice and saying a mile. They could see it from space. I talk to procurement and legal teams all the time. And they're like, it's so ridiculous when sellers are like, hey, can we have a 30-minute meeting? It's like, why? To convince me? of like, here's the one cheater on, they see it coming from a mile away. They know what they know what you're after. And they know what even the buyer hypothetically is after, is like getting it approved. But how you can counter all of that stuff from slowing the buyer down is they're confident that they're going to be able to solve it. Why? Because you found 3 unknowns, you found 5 unknowns, you found 7 unknowns. So it helps them solve it, but it also helps eradicate some of that ice, because it doesn't matter that there are 3 more people looking at me for making this decision. Why? Because I'm going to look like a genius whenever I actually solves the problem. At a conference, when a speaker says, asks a question, it's only 2 people raise their hand, it's not because only 2 people know the answer. It's because I'm afraid that if I get the answer wrong, I'm like under the chair. It's like in front of, all my peers. But if I get the answer right, I'm queen of the universe, right? That's how people are with decisions. That's how people are with letting you to other people internally. I don't want my boss to know about this, that we're making this decision. Why? Because I'm afraid if we get it wrong, if I think that we're going to get it right and we're going to crush it, and it was at my suggestion in hand, I'm going to want that put on the board of like, hey, I'm the one who brought this person in. I'm the one who suggested that we do this. I'm the one that we had the right answer. So the reverse principle happens. So in indecision, the deal, like, you have to keep in mind, indecision principles coming into play, things that will slow down a buyer. It's not like if, it's when, it's gravity. That's what will happen. If you put your arms out like this, eventually, might take time, blah, 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 depend on the weight, depend on the muscle mass, the hands will eventually fall to the ground because of gravity. If a deal exists, there will come in things, procurement, things will change internally. That's just what living is. So it's not about knowing all of those or controlling all of those or trying to get your buyer to control all of those. Then you just, help them understand that, like, your goal is just to get them to buy anyway. So the thing to be focused on, how you remove all of that friction, how you remove all of that ice, how you, essentially counter. It's not about targeting all the things that are going to come in the deal. It's not about knowing all the things that are going to come up in the deal. And it's not about helping equip them to counter these. It's helping equip them to be able to solve the problem. So their confidence grows because their ability grows, and the amount that they didn't know or things they believe that aren't true decreases. So I'm not targeting what they believe. I'm not, you cannot tell someone to be more confident in you and they're more confident. You can't say, trust me, and that builds trust. You tell them something else, you find something they didn't know, and then all of a sudden their trust in you increases. They trust in your agenda and their trust in your ability increases because you just help them. You just found something that they didn't know. So they're like, if they knew this and I didn't know this, like in my case scenario, I'm completely aware. It wouldn't be hard to outrun my expertise in terms of what I'm going to need in terms of these winter sports. But, if someone asked me the questions, I like, for a seller, I wouldn't really trust that their agenda was to help me, number one, or that they had, like that was their entire mission, was to help me, not to just sell me stuff. But if they started asking me questions and they actually prevented a purchase, or they helped me with something that it didn't even cause an increase for them, all of a sudden I would lean in, I would trust them. Buyers are aware that they don't know everything. They're 100% aware. That's why they're researching. Buyers are so aware of that it scares them still. And when you throw on these tactics, the COI selling, the discount, like COI selling, even though it's malevolent, incredibly selfish, it's ineffective, it will drop your rates. I think it's a byproduct of, our mindset. It's the offshoot. It's a symptom of our agenda, not the actual, so our problem is the agenda. And then how we carry that out, the mechanism of how, is finding unknowns so you can help them solve their problem. That's it. That's it, everyone. Day 4. Quattro formaggi. Really leaning into my Italian here. I think my mouth just needs a break after all the French, honestly. I'm like, that R can come back, bring the R out again. Anywho, I had so much fun today. I hope you did too. We're on day 4. So we're 25% the way there, you all. 25% of a gold medal so far. So thank you for tuning in today. Tune in tomorrow. We're going to be going back to prospecting tomorrow. And we're going to be going into a very fun topic, a very necessary topic. Some people might think this topic were boring if they weren't in sales, but it's a very necessary topic from my point of view. And I think from a lot of people's point of view, it is sequences, how to build sequences. What are all the steps? Should I do only email? Should I do only call? How many should I do? When should I do them, etc. So tune in tomorrow for sequences, the how to build them, all using outreach. Honestly, like the amount of build that I put into my sequences is the thing that helped me, from a team perspective, turn our day-to-day into, as I got accused by Manny, was the outreach CEO at the time, he said, of printing money. So there is a lot of system that goes into sequences. To be good in prospecting, to be good in selling, I mean, there's a lot of things go into selling. Selling is less about technique, it's more about expertise. How much do I know about the buyer? That is very important in selling or in prospecting as well. Also, though, a missed diagnosis people miss is there is a lot of knowledge that is necessary, not only in psychology end, not only on the email construction end of the aesthetic, how long, blah, blah, but on the technical end. How many emails should I do? When should I do them? How much is too much? When should I stop? When should I left? When someone finishes a sequence, what do? Put them right back in? Do I write a breakup email? When should they intertwine? What premise should I use? All of that is very technical conversation, very necessary conversation. So please tune in tomorrow for day number 5, and we will be cinco. So now I'm just like interchanging in different languages. So tune in tomorrow for day 5, where we'll be going into how to build sequences and strategy, and I'll be going through the infrastructure in terms of how you can build one into a sales engagement platform like the wonderful Outreach, which thank you to them. Every single day, I'm like, man, Outreach is dope. Like I'm on a mountain in the middle of Italy because of Outreach sent me here. So anyhow, thank you to my wonderful partners over at Outreach, and I will see you all tomorrow. We'll pick up how to build sequences, within their sales engagement tool or overall to smash your quota. That's it. Arrivederci for now, and I will see you all tomorrow. Ciao.